Hello and welcome back. In this part of the tutorial, I'm going to start with the back-end business logic development. Later on, as the tutorial progresses, I'll be switching between the front-end and the back-end development. So I'm using Spring Tool Suite and I'm going to create a new Spring Boot project by right-clicking in the Package Explorer and selecting New Spring Starter Project. I'm going to call it NH System. You can call it whatsoever you want. And the default settings here are okay for me. I'll click on Next. And here we need to add the project dependencies. We are also using Spring Boot version 1.5.10. So we are going to be using the time-lived templating engine. Since this is a web application, I'll also select this web dependency here. Next, for the database, we are going to be using Spring Data JPA to map Java classes to the database. So I'll add this dependency here. And we're also going to be using the MySQL database, this one here. We're also going to later on secure this application. So I'll just go ahead and add Spring Security. So I'll select this dependency here. And I'll also add this DevTools dependency. DevTools will help to automatically dictate any changes we make to our source files and restart the embedded Tomcat saver. So this is it for the dependencies for now. I'll click on Next and Finish. The project creation is done and I'll open up the application.properties file and configure the data source. So I'll expand this source main resources folder here and open up the application.properties file. I'll start by setting the database URL. So spring.datasource.url. This basically represents the location of the database. We are using MySQL, so the URL will be jdbc mysql. And we're also running on localhost, so I'll type here localhost. And the name of the database, I'll just call it app_db. This database does not exist yet. We are going to create it in a moment. Next, we need to specify the database username and password. So spring.datasource.username. The username I have here is root, and spring.datasource.password. I have no password. And next, I'm going to set the following JPA configurations. So spring.jpa show SQL. I'll set this to true. This will enable us to see all the queries we are doing against the database in the console. And also spring.jpa hibernate DTL auto. This one. I'll set this to create drop. So by so doing, if we run the application, the database will be dropped and recreated if it already exists. If it doesn't exist, it will be created. So when the application is executed, Spring Boot will read this configuration here and create the data source bin. With all of this in place, I'll start creating the domain objects. So I'll close this file and start by creating the first domain object. I'll right click on this package and create a new class. And all the domain objects will be located in this package. I'll call the first domain object here user. Finish. So this is going to have the following fields: private, string, email, private, string, name, private, string, password. So this user is going to be assigned some tags to do. So I'll create here a list of tags. So private list. This should be from java.util. I'll just call it task. And this class does not exist yet, so I'll create that class. Also in this package. Next, we also need to create some roles. So if the user has the role of an admin, he or she will be able to assign some tasks to other users. So I'll create here a list of roles. Private list role, and I'll call it roles. And this class does not exist. I'll also just go ahead and create it. Also in this package. And next I'll generate getters and setters. So I'll click on source and generate getters and setters. I'll select all of this and click OK. Next I'm going to generate two constructors. So again I'll click on source and select generate constructors using fields. Now I'll deselect the roles and the tags and click on OK. Then I'll also just go ahead here and create the default constructor. So public user, like so. So before annotating this class with the JPA annotations, I will go ahead and add the following fields in the tags class. So private long ID. This is going to be the primary key. Private string date. Private string start time. Private string stop time. Private string description. This would be the description of the task the user needs to perform. And finally, private user. So we're going to later on create this relationship between the tags and the user using JPA annotations. For the time being, I'll also just go ahead here and generate the getters and setters. So again, I'll click on source and generate getters and setters. I'll select all of this and click OK. Then I'll also generate the following constructors. The first one will have all of these. And the next constructor, this should be on source. The next constructor will not have the user, and it will also not have the ID field. Okay. And once more, I'll also just go ahead here and generate the default constructor. So again, I'll deselect all of this and click OK. I'll get rid of this super. We don't need it. Now save that. In the role class, I'm going to add the following fields. Private string name. This will be the primary key of this class. And private list user. I'll call this user. So a user can have many roles, and many roles also belong to one user. We are going to create this relationship with JPA annotations in a moment. Again, here I'll generate the getters and setters. So I'll click here and generate getters and setters. I'll also generate two constructors. The first constructor will contain both fields, and the next constructor should be then the default constructor. So I'll deselect all of this and click OK. In fact, I'll just go ahead also and generate another constructor that will contain only the name field. Again, here I'll get rid of super and save this. So with the fields now in place, I'm going to start annotating the classes with JPA annotations. In the user class, this is an entity, so it should be annotated with @entity annotation from javax.persistence. The email will be the primary key, so I'll annotate it with @id annotation. And it should also be an email. We're going to later on use this for validation. And then it should also not be empty. It should be not empty annotation. This one. And it should also be unique. So I'll add here add colon and set unique to true. Also, the name should not be empty, so I'll just copy this and paste it here. And the password should at least have a minimum length of 4. So I'll add here add size annotation and set here min to 4. So also here, this should be plural, it should be task, not just tasks. So I will change that. So I'll look for task and change it to task. So I'll replace all. This shouldn't be replaced. This should be task. And this should be task as well. The class name, as well as this one. So next, I'll create the relationship between the task and the user. As I earlier mentioned, a user will have a lot of tasks to perform. So this is why we have it here as a list. I'll then just go ahead and annotate it with add one to many annotation. One user will have a lot of tasks to perform. And I'll add the following: map by. I'll set it to user. Now the name we specify here should be exactly the name we have here in the task class. Okay. Map by the way, specify the owner of the relationship. In this case, the user class is the owner of this relationship. I'll also just go ahead here and set cascade to cascade type.r. This means that all the operations that will be performed on this table, at the end of the day, this class will represent a table in the database. All the operations that will be performed on this table, be it the update, the delete, and the save operations, should also be performed on the tags table. So next, I'll just go ahead and add the corresponding relationship of the user in the tags class. So I'll open that up. And here I'll annotate it with add many to one. Many tags belong to one and only one user. And I'll also add here a join column annotation. And set the name to user_email. So I'll type that in caps. So when this table is created in the database, it will have a field called user_email, whose value will be exactly the value we'll set in this email field here. And by so doing, we know exactly which task is being performed by which user. So I'll save this and save this as well. Next, I'll define a many-to-many relationship between the user and the role classes. In the case of this tutorial, any given user can be assigned multiple roles, and a single role can belong to many users. So I'll start by annotating this list object here with add many-to-many annotation. And I'm going to also set the cascade type to all, just as we did in the case of this one-to-many relationship. And in the role class here, I'll also annotate the user object with add many-to-many annotation. And here I'll set the map by property to roles. And remember, the name we pass in here should be exactly the same name we have here. A many-to-many relationship also generates a third table, whose columns are the primary keys of the classes that created the relationship. We can then just go ahead here and define how we want that table to look like. So here I will add a join table annotation. And I'll start by specifying the name of the table. So I would like that table to be called user_roles. Next, we also need to define how this field will be called in this table. So in order to do that, I'll add here join columns. And inside here, I'll add a join column annotation. And I would like to call that column user_email. We also need to tell Spring Data JPA that this field is referring to this particular one here. And in order to do that, we need to add here reference column name, which is email. Next, we also need to define how the primary key of the role class, that is this name here, will be called in this table. So once more, in order to do that, I'll add here inverse join columns. And I'll basically do something almost like this. So I'll just copy this and paste it here. And I'll change this to role_name. I'll type that in caps. And we're referring to the name in this class, that is this name here. So I'll type here name. So with all of this in place, I would like to again clarify that in the case of one-to-many relationship, where we specify map by defines the owner of the relationship. So the user in this case then will be the owner of that relationship, and that is supposing that the relationship is bidirectional. Now in the case of many-to-many, things are a little bit different. When we specify the join table annotation just on one side of the relationship, this will make, for example, the user here to be the owner of the relationship. Now, this is not the only way to do it. We can as well make both sides of the relationship to be the owner. In that case, we will need to copy all of what we have here and add it here. And by so doing, this side will also be the owner of the relationship. In that case, we'll need to get rid of the map by that we specified here. But in the case of this tutorial, we are not going to be needing that. So with that said, I'll then just go ahead and add the other annotations in these two classes. So I'll start by annotating this with @entity annotation. This will be a primary key, so I'll add here @id annotation. And I'll add here a generated value so that the ID will be auto-generated. Next, I'll just go ahead and add here not empty, and also the same thing on the other fields. So I'll just copy that and paste it here, and once more here, and finally on the description. So on the role class, I'm just going to annotate this with @entity annotation. And I'll add here @id annotation. Next, I'll create interfaces for all of these classes. These interfaces are going to extend Spring Data JPA repository, which on the other hand provides us with generic methods that can be used to do CRUD operations. So I'll just right click here and create a new interface. And I'll place all of these in a separate package. I'll call this one user repository. So this should extend JPA repository, and this takes two objects. The first one is the user object. Make sure here that you import the right object, and the type of the primary key, which is of type string for the user object. So I'll close this and create another one for the task. So I'll call this task repository. Again, this should extend JPA repository, and it will take the task object here and the type of the primary key, which is of type long for the task class. I'll close that and create another one again. And this should be for the role. So I'll call it role repository. Once more, extends JPA repository. We pass in the role object. Make sure here also to import the right object and the type of primary key, which is of type string for the role class. So this is done. I'll save it. So the next thing I would like to do is to run this application and see if these tables can be created in the database. So in order to do that, I need to make sure that this database here exists. I'll just copy this and open up XAMPP and create that database. So I'll click here on php-my-admin and create a new database. That should be this app_db. I'll create that. So that is done. I'll minimize this and this one as well. And now I'll right click on this main application here and run as Java application. So as can be seen here in the console, those tables were created in the database. I'll open up XAMPP again, and as you can see here, we have the role, the tags, the user, and the user roles tables. Also in php-my-admin, if you click on this more here and go to designer, then you can see how the database is designed. So it's something like this with all the relationships. So these are the 4 tables that we created from our Java code. So in the next video, I'm going to create the service classes and also do some unit testing. Until then, see you.